Prince William sat in the passenger seat of the black car, his hands shaking slightly as he stared out the window. The morning had started like any other day at their home in Windsor, but everything changed when his phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was his father, King Charles, and his voice sounded different. Not angry or upset, but tired in a way that made William's stomach drop with worry. "William, I need you and Catherine to come to the palace immediately," the king had said. "There are things we need to discuss as a family, important things that cannot wait." Kate had been making breakfast for the children when William walked into the kitchen with a serious expression on his face. She knew instantly that something was wrong. After 15 years together, she could read every emotion that crossed his face. The way his shoulders tensed, the way he ran his hand through his hair, the way he avoided looking directly at her while he spoke. "We need to go to Buckingham Palace," William had told her quietly, glancing toward the stairs to make sure the children were still getting ready for school. "Dad wants to see us right away." Kate felt her heart skip a beat. Royal summons were never good news, especially when they came without warning. She had learned over the years that the royal family preferred to keep their private conversations scheduled and formal. Emergency meetings meant crisis, and crisis in the royal family affected not just them but the entire nation. The drive to London felt endless, even though it only took 40 minutes. William kept checking his phone, hoping for some message that might give him a clue about what they were walking into. Kate sat beside him trying to stay calm, but her mind was racing with possibilities. Was it about the king's health? Everyone knew he had been looking tired lately during public appearances. Was it about Harry and the ongoing tensions within the family? Or was it something else entirely? Something they had not even considered? When they arrived at Buckingham Palace, the staff seemed unusually quiet. Even the guards who normally nodded politely at them looked serious and concerned. William and Kate were escorted through the familiar corridors, past portraits of previous kings and queens who had faced their own challenges and crises. The weight of history seemed to press down on them with each step they took toward the king's private study. King Charles was standing by the window when they entered, looking out at the palace gardens where tourists were already gathering for the changing of the guard. He turned slowly when he heard them come in, and Kate was shocked by how much older he looked than just a few weeks ago. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, and there was a heaviness in his posture that she had never noticed before. "Please, sit down," the king said, gesturing to the chairs arranged in front of his desk. His voice was gentle, but there was an underlying tension that made both William and Kate exchange worried glances as they took their seats. The king sat down across from them and was quiet for a long moment, as if he was gathering his thoughts or perhaps gathering his courage. Finally, he began to speak, and what he said made Kate's blood run cold. "The doctors have given me some difficult news," King Charles said slowly. "The treatment I have been receiving is not working as well as we had hoped. My condition is progressing faster than anyone expected, and we need to start making preparations for changes that may come sooner than we planned." William felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. He had known his father was receiving medical treatment, but the family had been told it was routine, manageable, nothing to worry about. Now, hearing these words, he realized they had been protecting him from the full truth. Kate reached over and took William's hand, squeezing it tightly. She could see the shock and pain in his eyes, and she knew he was trying to process what this meant, not just for his father, but for their entire family. The life they had carefully built, the balance they had tried to maintain between royal duty and normal family life, everything was about to change. "How long?" William asked, his voice barely above a whisper. King Charles shook his head. "The doctors cannot give me exact timelines. It could be months, it could be years, but what they have made clear is that I need to start preparing you for responsibilities that may come to you much sooner than any of us anticipated." The conversation that followed was unlike anything William and Kate had ever experienced. King Charles spoke about the monarchy, about duty, about the sacrifices that would be required. He talked about George, Charlotte, and Louis, and how their lives would change. He discussed the public scrutiny that would intensify, the loss of privacy, the constant pressure that came with being next in line to the throne. Kate found herself thinking about her children, who were probably sitting in their classrooms at school right now, completely unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. George was only 11 years old, but as the future king, his childhood would be cut short in ways that other children could never understand. Charlotte and Louis would face their own challenges, growing up in the shadow of their brother's destiny, while trying to find their own paths in life. The king also spoke about practical matters. Security would need to be increased immediately. Their public schedule would change dramatically. There would be more official duties, more state functions, more time away from home. The careful balance they had maintained between royal obligations and family time would become much more difficult to sustain. As the meeting continued, Kate excused herself twice to step outside and compose herself. The bathroom down the hall became her refuge, where she could let the tears fall without anyone seeing. She splashed cold water on her face and stared at herself in the mirror, trying to find strength she was not sure she possessed. When she returned to the study each time, she could see that William was struggling just as much as she was. His face had gone pale, and his usual composure was cracking under the weight of what they were learning. This was not just about accepting more responsibility or attending more events. This was about fundamentally changing who they were as a family and how they lived their lives. The meeting lasted for over 2 hours, and by the time it ended, both William and Kate felt emotionally drained. King Charles hugged them both before they left, holding on a little longer than usual, and Kate could feel how much this conversation had cost him as well. Walking back through the palace corridors, Kate felt like she was seeing everything through new eyes. The grandeur that had once seemed beautiful now felt overwhelming. The portraits of previous monarchs no longer looked inspiring, but rather like warnings of the sacrifices that lay ahead. As they settled back into their car for the drive home, both William and Kate were lost in their own thoughts. The morning had changed everything, and they both knew there was no going back to the way things were before. The weight of the crown was already settling on William's shoulders, even though his father was still very much alive and still very much the king. The countryside rolled past their windows as they drove home to Windsor, but neither of them really saw it. They were both thinking about the conversation they would need to have with their children and wondering how they would find the words to explain that everything was about to change. The silence in the car was almost unbearable as William and Kate drove away from Buckingham Palace. Neither of them had spoken since they left the king's study, both lost in their own thoughts about everything they had just learned. Kate stared out the window at the busy London streets, watching normal people going about their normal lives, and she felt a strange sense of disconnection from the world outside their tinted windows. William gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Every few minutes he would glance over at Kate, wanting to say something comforting, but he could not find the right words. How do you comfort someone when you are just as scared and overwhelmed as they are? How do you be strong for your family when you feel like your own world is falling apart? Kate's mind kept drifting to their children. Right now, George was probably in his mathematics class, completely focused on solving problems that seemed so important to an 11-year-old boy. Charlotte was likely in art class, her tongue sticking out slightly as she concentrated on her painting, the way she always did when she was creating something she was proud of. And little Louis was probably running around the playground with his friends, laughing and playing games that seemed like the most important thing in the world. They had no idea that everything was about to change for them. They had no idea that their father would soon carry responsibilities that would change not just his life, but theirs as well. Kate felt tears building up behind her eyes again as she thought about how to explain to them that their relatively normal childhood was coming to an end much sooner than anyone had expected. "We need to tell them today," William said suddenly, breaking the long silence between them. His voice was hoarse, as if speaking was physically difficult after the emotional mourning they had endured. Kate nodded, even though the thought terrified her. "How do we even begin that conversation?" she asked quietly. "George is still just a little boy. He loves football and video games and building things with his hands. How do we tell him that all of that is going to have to take second place to royal duties?" William pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. They were parked near a small park where families were playing with their children, and the contrast between those carefree moments and their own situation felt almost cruel. "I keep thinking about my own childhood," William said, staring straight ahead. "I remember the exact moment when I realized that my life was never going to be normal. I was about George's age, maybe a little older. Suddenly, there were more security, guards, more formal events, more people telling me how to sit and how to speak and how to behave. I remember feeling angry about it, feeling like something had been taken away from me." Kate reached over and took his hand. She could hear the pain in his voice, the memories of a childhood that had been cut short by duty and responsibility. She knew that William had always tried to give their children as normal a childhood as possible, and now that effort felt like it had been wasted. "But you turned out to be an amazing father and an amazing man," Kate said softly. "Maybe because you went through those challenges, you know how to help them through it too." William squeezed her hand but did not look convinced. "What if they hate us for it?" he asked. "What if they blame us for the life they are going to have to live? What if they resent the fact that they never got to choose their own path?" It was a fear that both of them had carried for years but had never spoken out loud. The fear that their children would grow up to resent the circumstances of their birth, the way some royal children had in the past. The fear that the love and closeness they had worked so hard to build as a family would be damaged by the pressures and expectations that were about to descend on them. Kate thought about her own childhood, growing up in a loving but normal family in Berkshire. Her biggest worries had been about school exams and friendships and whether she would make the netball team. She had been able to make mistakes without the entire world watching and judging. She had been able to figure out who she was without constantly being compared to her ancestors or having her every choice analyzed by newspaper columnists. "Do you ever regret it?" William asked suddenly. "Marrying me, I mean. Taking on all of this?" Kate turned to look at him, surprised by the question. She could see genuine worry in his eyes, as if he was afraid that everything they had just learned might make her want to run away from the life they had built together. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single second. We knew this day would come eventually. We just thought we would have more time to prepare for it." They sat in silence for a few more minutes, watching the families in the park. A little girl was learning to ride a bicycle, wobbling back and forth while her father ran alongside her, ready to catch her if she fell. It was such a simple, normal moment, but it represented everything that William and Kate were afraid their children might lose. "We need to focus on what we can control," Kate said finally. "We cannot change what is happening, but we can control how we handle it. We can make sure that George, Charlotte, and Louis know that we love them no matter what. We can make sure they understand that even though their responsibilities are going to change, they are still our children first and royal children second." William nodded slowly. "We need to be honest with them, but not overwhelm them with everything at once. Maybe we start by explaining that Grandpa Charles is not feeling well, and that means Daddy is going to have to help him more with his work. And we make sure they know that nothing changes about how much we love them," Kate added, "that no matter how busy things get, they will always be our priority." As they started the car again and continued their drive home to Windsor, both William and Kate felt slightly less overwhelmed than they had when they left the palace. They still had no idea how they were going to manage everything that was coming, but at least they had a plan for the first conversation they needed to have. The familiar countryside around their home looked different somehow, as if they were seeing it through new eyes. The fields where they had taken family walks, the pub where they had sometimes stopped for Sunday lunch, the small villages where they had tried to give their children a taste of normal life. All of it felt precious. Now, in a way, it had not before. Kate found herself memorizing details that she had taken for granted, the way the afternoon light fell across the fields, the sound of church bells in the distance, the sight of other families walking their dogs or riding bicycles along the country lanes. She had a feeling that these simple pleasures were about to become much more rare and much more precious. "Whatever happens," William said as they turned into their driveway, "we face it together, as a family." Kate smiled for the first time all day. "Together," she agreed. As they sat in the car for a moment before going inside to face their children, both William and Kate took deep breaths and prepared themselves for the next chapter of their lives, whatever it might bring. William and Kate walked slowly up the stone path to their front door at Adelaide Cottage, both of them trying to prepare mentally for the conversation they were about to have with their children. The afternoon sun was shining brightly, creating long shadows across their garden, and under normal circumstances it would have been a perfect day to spend time outside as a family, but nothing about this day felt normal anymore. Kate paused at the front steps and looked around their property with new eyes. This house had been their sanctuary, the place where they could just be a normal family without the constant pressure of royal duties. The children had learned to ride their bicycles on the gravel driveway. They had built snowmen in the winter and had water balloon fights in the summer. It was here that George had taken his first steps, where Charlotte had said her first words, where Louis had learned to climb trees. Now Kate wondered how much longer they would be able to call this place home. Would the increased security requirements mean they would have to move somewhere more formal and less private? Would there still be room for bicycle rides and water balloon fights when their lives became consumed with state dinners and official ceremonies? William fumbled with his keys, his hands still shaking slightly from the emotional morning they had endured. He could hear voices coming from inside the house, and the sound of his children laughing should have made him feel better, but instead it made his heart ache. In just a few minutes, he was going to have to tell them that their carefree childhood was about to change forever. "Maybe we should wait until after dinner," Kate suggested quietly, as William struggled to get the key in the lock. "Let them have one more normal afternoon before we turn their world upside down." William shook his head. "If we wait, we will just keep finding reasons to put it off, and they deserve to hear this from us before they hear it from anyone else." Kate knew he was right, but that did not make the prospect any less terrifying. She had always prided herself on being honest with her children, on treating them with respect and explaining things to them in ways they could understand. But how do you explain something like this? How do you tell children that their grandfather is sick and that their father might become king much sooner than anyone expected? As William finally managed to unlock the door, they could hear more clearly, the sounds coming from inside their home. George was talking excitedly about something that had happened at school, his voice animated in the way it got when he was really passionate about a topic. Charlotte was giggling at something, that infectious laugh that always made everyone around her smile. And Louis was making sound effects for whatever game he was playing, complete with explosions and engine noises. The normalcy of it all made Kate want to cry again. These were the sounds of happy, secure children who trusted that their parents would always protect them and keep their world safe and predictable. In a few minutes, that trust was going to be tested in ways that Kate was not sure any of them were ready for. They walked through the hallway toward the living room, where Maria, their nanny, was supervising homework time. George was sprawled on the floor with his mathematics book spread around him, using colored pens to make charts and diagrams. Charlotte was at the small table near the window, working on what looked like a history project about ancient Egypt. Louis was supposed to be practicing his reading, but he had gotten distracted and was using his pencils as tiny swords, acting out some elaborate battle scene. "Mummy, Daddy." Louis spotted them first and jumped up to run toward them, his reading book forgotten on the floor. "Look what I made." He held up a drawing that appeared to be their family, but with everyone wearing crowns and riding on horses. "We are all kings and queens in my picture." Kate felt her breath catch in her throat at the innocence of the drawing. If only Louis knew how close to reality his picture was about to become. She knelt down to his level and studied the drawing carefully, trying to keep her voice steady as she praised his artwork. "It is beautiful, darling," she said, giving him a hug. "You are such a talented artist." Charlotte looked up from her homework and smiled at her parents. "Mummy, did you know that in ancient Egypt, when a pharaoh died, his son would become the new pharaoh right away, even if the son was still very young?" The irony of Charlotte's homework topic was not lost on either William or Kate. Here, their daughter was learning about ancient succession laws, completely unaware that similar principles were about to affect her own life in very real ways. "That is very interesting, Charlotte," William said, his voice sounding strained even to his own ears. Ancient Egypt had many fascinating customs. George looked up from his mathematics work and studied his parents' faces with the perceptive intelligence that sometimes surprised them. Even at 11 years old, George had always been good at reading people's emotions and sensing when something was wrong. "Is everything okay?" George asked, sitting up straighter. "You both look sad about something." Kate and William exchanged glances. Their oldest son's intuition meant there was no point in trying to pretend everything was fine. George would see through any attempt to act normal, and it would only make him more worried and suspicious. Maria seemed to sense that the family needed some privacy. "I think I will go start preparing dinner," she said tactfully, gathering up some of the scattered homework supplies. "Children, please put away your things so you can talk with your parents." As Maria left the room, William and Kate sat down on the large sofa, and the three children automatically arranged themselves nearby. This was their usual formation for family discussions, and the familiarity of it provided some comfort even in this difficult moment. "We need to talk to you about something important," William began, looking at each of his children in turn. "Something that is going to affect all of us as a family." Charlotte immediately looked worried. "Are you getting divorced?" she asked anxiously. "My friend Emma's parents had lots of serious talks before they got divorced." "No, sweetheart," Kate said quickly, reaching out to squeeze Charlotte's hand. "Daddy and I love each other very much, and we are not getting divorced. This is about something different." Louis crawled onto Kate's lap, sensing the serious tone of the conversation even if he did not understand what it was about. "Are we in trouble?" he asked in a small voice. "No one is in trouble," William assured him. "But we do need to talk about some changes that are going to happen in our family." George leaned forward, his young face serious and attentive. "Is it about Grandpa Charles?" he asked quietly. "He has been looking very tired lately when we see him." William felt a surge of pride at his son's perceptiveness, mixed with sadness that George would have to grow up so quickly. "Yes, it is about Grandpa Charles," William said gently. "He has been feeling unwell, and the doctors think he's going to need more help with his work as king." The three children absorbed this information with varying degrees of understanding. Charlotte looked genuinely concerned about her grandfather's health. Louis seemed more confused than worried, not fully grasping the implications. But George's expression showed that he understood exactly what his father was really saying, even if the words had not been spoken directly yet. "That means you are going to have to help him more," George said slowly. "With king things." William nodded. "Yes, that is exactly right, which means our family is going to have some changes in how we live and what we do." The living room fell completely silent after William's words. Kate could hear the old grandfather clock in the hallway ticking steadily, marking each second that passed while their three children tried to process what they had just been told. Charlotte was the first to speak, her voice small and uncertain. "What kind of changes?" she asked, looking back and forth between her parents. "Will we still live here? Will we still go to the same school?" William felt his heart break a little at the worry in his daughter's voice. These were exactly the kinds of questions he had been dreading, because he did not have good answers for most of them. So much would depend on how quickly his father's condition progressed and how soon the additional responsibilities would fall on his shoulders. "We are still figuring out all the details," Kate said gently, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "But what we want you to know is that no matter what changes happen, we will always make sure you feel safe and loved." Louis, who was still sitting on Kate's lap, looked up at his mother with wide eyes. "Will there be more policemen around our house?" he asked. "Like the ones who follow us sometimes when we go places?" The question caught both parents off guard. They had tried so hard to make the security presence in their children's lives as unobtrusive as possible, but apparently Louis had noticed more than they realized. Kate glanced at William, unsure how to answer honestly, without frightening their youngest child. "There might be a few more people whose job it is to keep us safe," William said carefully, "but they will try to stay out of your way as much as possible, just like they do now." George had been quiet throughout this exchange, but Kate could see him thinking hard about everything he was hearing. Finally, He spoke up with a question that showed he understood the situation better than his younger siblings. "Does this mean I am going to be king someday?" George asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like, really soon?" The directness of the question took William's breath away. He had been trying to ease into the topic gradually, but his 11-year-old son had cut straight to the heart of the matter. There was no point in trying to avoid the truth now. "Someday, yes," William said, his voice gentle but honest. "But hopefully not for a very long time. Right now, Grandpa Charles is still the king, and I will help him with his work. But you are right that this means you will need to start learning more about what it means to be part of the royal family." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "But I do not want George to be king," she said, her voice breaking. "I want him to just be my brother. I want us to just be a normal family." Kate felt her own tears threatening to spill over at her daughter's words. Charlotte had perfectly captured the fear that all of them had been feeling but had not been able to express. The fear that their family bond would somehow be damaged by the weight of royal duty and tradition. "George will always be your brother first," Kate said firmly, reaching out to pull Charlotte into a hug. "Being king is something he might have to do in the future, but it does not change who he is or how much he loves you and Louis." Louis looked confused by all the talk about kings and duties. "Can I be king too?" he asked innocently. "It sounds fun." Despite the serious nature of the conversation, both William and Kate could not help but smile at their youngest son's enthusiasm. "Being king is not really fun," William explained. "It is actually a lot of work and responsibility. But Charlotte, and you will have important jobs too, helping George and supporting the royal family." "What if I do not want to?" Charlotte asked, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "What if I want to be a teacher or a doctor or something normal?" It was a question that William had asked himself many times growing up, and he knew it was important to answer honestly. "You can still be whatever you want to be," he said, "but you will also have some royal duties that you will need to do. We will help you figure out how to balance both things." George had been listening to his siblings' questions, but Kate could see that he was still processing his own feelings about what he had learned. Finally, he looked directly at his father and asked the question that had been building inside him. "Are you scared, Daddy?" George asked quietly. "About becoming king?" The simple honesty of the question hit William like a physical blow. Here was his son, asking him to be vulnerable and real in a way that royal training had never prepared him for. William looked at Kate, who nodded encouragingly, and then back at his son. "Yes," William said simply. "I am scared. It is a big responsibility, and I want to do a good job, but I also know that I have Mummy to help me, and I have all of you to remind me what is really important." The admission seemed to help George relax slightly. "Will you teach me how to do it?" he asked. "So I will know what to do when it is my turn?" "Of course," William said, feeling a surge of pride at his son's courage. "We will learn together, and we will make sure you have plenty of time to just be a kid too." Kate looked around at her 3 children and felt overwhelmed by how differently each of them was processing this information. Charlotte was worried about losing the normalcy she treasured. Louis was curious but not fully understanding the implications. And George was already trying to prepare himself for responsibilities that were still years away. "I think that is enough serious talk for today," Kate said, sensing that all of them needed a break from the heavy conversation. "Why do not we go outside and play football in the garden? We can continue talking about this over the next few days and weeks." The suggestion was met with enthusiasm from all 3 children, who seemed relieved to have permission to stop thinking about kings and duties for a while. As they headed toward the back door, Kate caught William's arm and held him back for a moment. "How do you think that went?" she asked quietly. William considered the question carefully. "Better than I expected, actually," he said. "They are stronger than we give them credit for." Kate nodded, but she could see the worry still lingering in his eyes. "We are going to have a lot more conversations like this one," she said. "This is just the beginning." "I know," William replied, watching through the window as their children ran around the garden, already seeming to have forgotten the serious nature of their discussion. "But at least now they know the truth. We can build from here." As they joined their children outside, both William and Kate felt a small sense of relief. The first difficult conversation was behind them, and their family was still intact. There would be many more challenges ahead, but they had taken the first step together. After spending an hour in the garden playing football with the children, William and Kate finally managed to get all three of them settled down for the evening. The physical activity had helped everyone release some of the tension from their serious conversation, but Kate could tell that the children were still processing everything they had learned. Charlotte kept asking random questions about what their lives would be like. Louis seemed more clingy than usual, and George had grown unusually quiet and thoughtful. Once the children were in bed, William and Kate sat together in their kitchen, both feeling emotionally exhausted from the day. They had barely touched their dinner, both too stressed to have much appetite. Kate kept thinking about all the phone calls they would need to make, all the arrangements that would need to be discussed, all the ways their lives were about to change. "We should call your parents," William said, breaking the silence. "They need to know what is happening before they hear it from someone else." Kate nodded, but the thought of having that conversation made her feel tired all over again. Her parents had always been supportive of her royal role, but she knew they worried about the pressure it put on her and especially on their grandchildren. This news was going to be particularly difficult for them to hear. "Maybe we should wait until tomorrow," Kate suggested. "I do not think I can handle another emotional conversation today." William understood completely. They had already reached their limit for difficult discussions, and they both needed time to process everything themselves before they started explaining it to other people. As they sat in their quiet kitchen, both of them kept glancing toward the stairs, listening for any sounds from the children's bedrooms. It was not unusual for one of them to come downstairs after bedtime with questions or complaints, and tonight they were both expecting it to happen. Sure enough, about 20 minutes later, they heard small footsteps on the stairs. George appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing his pajamas and looking uncertain about whether he was in trouble for being out of bed. "I could not sleep," he said quietly. "I keep thinking about everything we talked about today." Kate immediately got up and pulled out a chair for him at the kitchen table. "Come sit with us," she said gently. "What kinds of things are you thinking about?" George climbed onto the chair and looked back and forth between his parents. "Will people treat me differently now?" he asked. "At school, I mean. When they find out that I might be king someday?" It was a perceptive question that showed George understood some of the social implications of his situation. William remembered his own school experiences, how friendships had become complicated once other children realized the full extent of his royal status. "Some people might treat you differently," William said honestly. "But the real friends, the ones who matter, will still just see you as George. It might take time to figure out who those people are." George nodded slowly, as if he had expected this answer. "Will I still be able to play football?" he asked. "And video games? And normal kid things?" "Of course," Kate said quickly. "We will make sure you still have time for all the things you love to do. It might mean we have to plan your schedule more carefully, but you will still get to be a kid." "What about Charlotte and Louis?" George asked, showing the protective instinct toward his siblings that had always made his parents proud. "Will they be okay with all the changes?" William felt a surge of emotion at his son's concern for his brother and sister. "They will be okay because they have you looking out for them," he said, "and because we will all look out for each other." George seemed satisfied with these answers, but Kate could tell he had more questions. "Is there anything else you want to talk about?" she asked. "Will you and Daddy still have time for us?" George asked, his voice very small. "Or will you be too busy with king and queen things?" The question broke Kate's heart, because she knew it came from a real fear. George had probably heard stories about royal children who barely saw their parents, who were raised mostly by nannies and staff while their parents attended to royal duties. "You, Charlotte, and Louis will always be our most important job," Kate said firmly, reaching across the table to take George's hand. "Everything else comes second to being your parents." William nodded in agreement. "We might be busier than before, but we will make sure we still have family time every single day." That is a promise. George smiled for the first time since coming downstairs. Can we still have movie nights on Fridays? He asked. Absolutely, William said. Friday movie nights are sacred in this family. After George went back to bed, William and Kate remained in the kitchen for a while longer. The conversation with their son had actually made them both feel a little better. Despite everything that was changing, their family bond remained strong. He is going to be okay, Kate said quietly. They all are. It is going to be hard, but they are stronger than we think. William nodded, but he was looking toward the front of the house with a puzzled expression. Do you hear that? He asked. Kate listened carefully and realized she could hear voices coming from outside their front door. Not threatening voices, but familiar ones. It sounded like people they knew, but that was impossible. They had not invited anyone over, and it was late in the evening for unexpected visitors. That sounds like your sister, William said, standing up to look out the window. But what would Pippa be doing here at this time of night? Kate joined him at the window and peered out into the darkness. There were definitely cars in their driveway that had not been there earlier, and she could see lights on in what looked like more than one vehicle. Maybe something happened, Kate said, suddenly worried. Maybe there is some kind of emergency. William was already moving toward the front door, his protective instincts kicking in. Their security team would have alerted them if there was any real danger, but the unexpected presence of family members at their home was still concerning. As William reached for the door handle, he could hear the voices more clearly now. It was definitely Pippa, but there were other voices too. Voices that sounded happy and excited rather than worried or upset. Surprise. The word echoed through the night air, even before William opened the door, and he realized that whatever was waiting for them outside was not an emergency at all. Kate came up behind him, equally confused but no longer worried. What is going on? She whispered. William took a deep breath and turned the door handle. Whatever was waiting for them on the other side, they were about to find out together. After the emotional roller coaster of the day, neither of them could have predicted what they were about to discover on their own doorstep. The door swung open, and William and Kate stood frozen in the doorway, completely unprepared for what they saw waiting for them in their front garden.